Welcome back to our podcast today. As we said before, we'll be trying to get more politicians, and today we have Senator Rex Patrick. Patrick, thank you for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
So for the viewers out there, Rex, could you give us a little bit more information about yourself? So, your roles within Parliament and your prior jobs before joining Parliament and becoming a senator.
Okay, starting out when I was 16 years old, I left school and I joined the Navy, and I spent about 11 years in the Navy as an electronic technician on our submarines, both the Oberon class and the Collins class submarines. I then worked in defence industries for about 13 years. After I concluded that role, I started my own business up. Ran that for about 8 years, quite successful both here in Australia and internationally, involved in consulting in relation to project management and also acoustic warfare training, which is a bit of a niche topic. And somehow I got dragged into politics and ended up helping initially a Liberal senator, simply on the topic of submarines because I had a strong background in that particular area. And then Nick Xenophon, more broadly, he asked me to come on as an advisor. I did. And then when he resigned from the Senate, he asked me to take his position. So I'm an accidental senator. I've gone from scullery to the Senate over my working career.
Great. So I believe we'll get started with the questions now. I believe, George, you have the first question.
Yeah, I do. So my question is, do you think the Chinese actions in the Pacific Ocean should concern Australians about the threat from them?
Okay, so China is a growing country, both economically and from a military perspective. That generally is a natural thing when as countries become more powerful economically. They do tend to have a commensurate increase in military capability. There's no question that China has basically sought to influence politics and diplomacy across a broad area, including the Pacific. We've seen them engaging with Pacific Island nations, for example, and much of their efforts appear to sort of centre around things like shoring up the Chinese position on Taiwan, but also making sure that they look after their own supply chains, so fisheries, mineral exploration, and so forth. Now, we shouldn't necessarily be concerned about China as it does seek to engage internationally. What we do have to do, however, is check everything against our own strategic interests, our own national security, and make sure that there is no conflict. So, perhaps closer military engagement may be of concern to us. Things like the port in Papua New Guinea, the fisheries project in Papua New Guinea, where China appears to be trying to establish a fishing industry that would have both environmental effects in the Torres Strait and indeed would have national security concerns. So we have to check what China is doing. Not everything needs to raise concerns, but where it does intersect with our own national interests, we do need to look closely at it.
Yeah, just to touch on some of those points as well. So, as we've seen, China's been building a lot of projects in the Pacific nations, such as Fiji, Samoa, New Caledonia, Solomon Islands, and all those nations. Do you think those things are really concerning as well?
So I just missed the last part of your question.
Oh, do you think that's really concerning as well, that they're building projects in these Pacific nations?
Again, we don't mind China assisting in those sorts of areas, as long as the purpose is not, as some have suggested, to basically laden these countries up with debt such that there is a dependency. I've been to East Timor and I've seen construction on the Southern Plateau, construction of freeways, construction of electricity services and so forth. It does concern me a little bit that they are engaged in some critical infrastructure projects such as electricity distribution. Again, we need to look at the motives as to why they are investing in these regions and consider exactly what the objectives are and respond accordingly. Another example is where the Chinese offered to build a communication cable from the Solomons. Australia eventually came to the party and offered the Solomon Islands government a better deal, and I have no doubt that there were national security concerns and/or diplomacy concerns that related to the decision by the Australian government to assist the Solomons in that regard.
So now we'll go on to the next question. So I have this question. Do you think the government took the wrong decision in asking for a COVID-19 inquiry?
Look, I think it's appropriate that the world conducts an inquiry into a global pandemic, looking at its origins and how perhaps the next time we confront something like this, we deal with it better. In terms of a decision to back an inquiry, absolutely the government is correct. Where we could have done things better was perhaps rather than step out the front in calling for the inquiry, perhaps doing a little bit more work with our friends and partners such that the call was multilateral. In the end, it appears as though China has retaliated against Australia in the area of trade. And I certainly think that is most inappropriate and is not the sort of reaction we would have expected. But the Prime Minister perhaps should have approached this slightly more cooperatively and multilaterally and avoided some of the problems that have resulted as China has reacted.
Yeah, just to touch on some of those points again as well. So you think that they should have waited for other countries, such as like other G20 countries who were also probably going to try and go for the inquiry? Do you think they should have waited for them? Because I remember a lot of them were saying they didn't want to go into the inquiry just then because a lot of them were battling for the first and second wave still.
Yeah, look, and again, that result revolves around the timing of announcements. Should have Australia waited? I'm not suggesting waiting per se. I'm suggesting that we could have led behind the scenes in building a multilateral party of countries that pressed for the inquiry. That's my only criticism. It's absolutely right for Australia and all other countries to expect and indeed have an inquiry conducted out into events that had such global significance.
So we'll now get on to the next question. Tobias, I believe you have this question as well.
Yes. How will our current relationship with China affect our trade with the country?
Okay, so we've seen China reacting, not necessarily strictly to the COVID inquiry call. We know that, for example, China has been disgruntled with Australia in respect to our responses to foreign influence and espionage and cyber warfare. We've also seen China expressing concerns about Australia weighing into things like Taiwan, the South China Sea. Again, things like the exclusion of Huawei from our 5G network. All of that has contributed to a situation where China appears to be using what I would refer to as a dependency club against Australia, perhaps to show the rest of the world that China needs to be kowtowed to. I say that noting we have got a huge trade dependency with China and perhaps an unhealthy trade dependency with China. And we need to now look at how we diversify. We need to look at other markets, and that's starting to happen now, looking at places like India. I'm aware that in relation to seafood, we're looking at alternate markets throughout Asia, for example, for our lobster. And that is a good thing. But we also need to diversify internally as well. We seem to have a propensity in this country to just export rocks. And I'd love to see us, rather than exporting iron ore, exporting steel. Rather than exporting lithium, I'd like to see us exporting batteries, where we get to do the value add, we benefit from the value add, and we create employment and intellectual property along the way. So there's no question that China is engaged in a geopolitical, that they are executing a geopolitical strategy in relation to Australia and some of the positions that we take, and that it's not about any individual item like coal or barley or lobster or wine or timber. It's not about any individual commodity. It is about a strategy. We need to recognise that and respond accordingly.
Yeah, just touch on that as well. I believe the Chinese government sent to Australian government 14 grievances for that they're unhappy with what Australia has done to them. Do you think that's also part of the strategy as well?
Well, I think it's part of the genesis of their strategy to sort of inflict pain upon us, economic pain. So they're exercising some of the economic power that they have against Australia. Those 14 grievances, many of them, to alter them, to remedy them, would be inconsistent with our values. So, for example, the South China Sea, we have a strong belief in freedom of navigation. Throughout the world, not just the South China Sea, as signatories to the UNCLOS Treaty, we have strong human rights standards. So, in relation to the Uyghurs in Western China, we shouldn't be kowtowing to the Chinese in relation to that because of our strong beliefs. The situation in Hong Kong, we are firmly a democratic state. We believe in things like freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of association, the rule of law. All of those sorts of things are in our DNA, and we'd like to support other countries that have a similar DNA to us. And so the 14 demands, many of them are simply incompatible with the way in which Australians think, and that gives rise to the difficulties that we're having. If they were simple propositions the Chinese were putting, we could perhaps remedy them, but I don't think that's actually possible.
So we'll get on to the next question. Tobias, I believe also you have this question as well.
Yes. Do you think it is concerning if the government doesn't have contact with their Chinese counterpart?
Oh, look, I think it shows the state of the relationship. Even if Chinese officials did pick up the phone to our relevant ministers, because of the nature of the controversy, I don't think it would make much difference in terms of outcomes and how we play things. I would suggest that it's more of an indication of the way in which the Chinese are playing this game. It's quite unusual that a ministerial counterpart in another country wouldn't pick up the phone to have to engage with someone from a foreign jurisdiction. So I think I'm not convinced in any way that taking calls would make the situation any better. I simply look at it as saying it's indicative of the nature of the controversy.
Yeah, just touching those points as well. I believe the agricultural minister, Minister Littleproud, stated a few months ago that he didn't have they didn't have any contact with their Chinese counterparts even before COVID as well. So that's also very interesting as well.
Well, it does raise questions about the operations of our Department of Foreign Affairs in China. We invest in having diplomatic missions in various different countries, and part of the purpose of those missions is to make sure that we've got links into foreign governments. So in some sense that causes us to look and say, what's actually happening inside the Australian embassy in Beijing and the other satellite embassies around China.
So we'll now get on to the next question. George, I believe you have this question as well.
Yep. So do you think the government should have a backup plan if China is not seen as a feasible trading partner and they continue to ban our goods?
Okay, I think that goes back to the answer I gave before about having a strong dependency with any particular nation is not a healthy thing for resilience and for just general good practice in terms of trading. We need to diversify to make sure we've got supply chains in a number of different countries, and that we have export markets in a number of different countries. And again, as part of our solution, we need to make sure that we are doing things at home as well, rather than simply exporting raw commodities and then importing at much greater cost those products having been turned into something slightly more advanced.
Also, just to touch on that as well, I believe in some of the previous questions you talked about us trying to get with other Asian nations such as India, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia. Do you think that's a really good idea to try and get into those countries as well, to consider trading with them as well?
Yeah, I think it's not only a good idea, it's essential that we do that. We do need to make sure that we are working with all of those countries, and putting all your eggs into one basket, particularly when that basket is controlled by a totalitarian regime, that is the Chinese Communist Party, and that's saying nothing against the wonderful people that live in China. I know lots and lots of Chinese people, just really nice people, but just the political system in China is incompatible with the way in which we think, and we need to be very cautious in putting our eggs into that one basket, particularly noting that.
So now we'll get on to the last question as well. I'll be asking this one. Do you think Australia should place more funding into their armed services, such as the Army, Navy, and the Air Force?
Well, it is for the Defence Department to basically examine what the strategic threat is, look at the capabilities of countries within our region, and make sure that we are able to respond to different threat levels. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that we can defend Australia. We then, expanding out, want to make sure that we can assist those very friendly and close nations like Papua New Guinea, like New Zealand, and then further out into the region, and then also recognising our alliance partnership as well with the United States. So this needs to be driven from the requirements side rather than simply saying we need more. We always need to be examining what our strategic situation is. Now, having said that, it's clear that we're seeing China expand into our region. We're seeing more and more naval vessels from China expanding from their traditional operating areas like the South China Sea into the Indian Ocean, into the Pacific Ocean. And we need to be able to make sure we can respond to that. We need to look at what threats and capabilities the Chinese have and make sure that we have an insurance policy in place. The first role of our defence force is not to fight wars. It's actually to deter wars, to make sure that everyone understands that the capability of our defence force is such that if they wish to use military coercion against us, there's a much higher cost than they're comfortable with. My feel about that is we need to be probably spending more on defence, but I'll also say that we need to be spending what we are spending in a much wiser manner. So, for example, we are investing in 12 new submarines. I actually think that's a good thing. As a former submariner, I know the capabilities of submarines, but I look at the cost of those particular submarines. They are certainly the most expensive submarines in the world. And one's got to ask the question, for that amount of money, are we getting a submarine, noting it's costing probably twice as much as a nuclear-powered submarine? Is it a submarine that gives us twice the capabilities of a nuclear-powered submarine? And my great fear, my quite informed fear, is that is simply not the case. Every time we have a project that fails, and that does happen from time to time. We've just seen the cancellation of a project related to submarine rescue. That's money that is wasted, and that could have been spent on other capabilities. Every time we see a blowout in cost in a defence project, that can be related to another capability that could otherwise have been procured. The short answer is there's probably a case for it, but that's the role of our Defence Department, to keep a good eye on what is going on around in the immediate region, in the Asia Pacific and globally, and making sure we have the capacity to respond to incidents and indeed major conflicts.
Oh, just touch on the points you had with the submarines as well. I believe that the submarines that we're getting is from France as well.
That's correct.
And I believe that they're being converted from nuclear power to conventional power, as we don't use nuclear power in Australia. Do you think that's also concerning, as there could be some heightened risk and there could be some faults within the submarine as well?
Well, I think the entire program is loaded with risk. We've seen with this particular program, which sort of commenced in 2016, its costs have gone from $50 billion for acquisition to $89 billion. That's a $39 billion increase. Now, most people can't wrap their head around what $39 billion is, so let's reduce it down to a unit that people can more easily understand. That's $39,000 million in additional cost. That's $2.8 million per day for the next 38 years. Again, that's not for the cost of the submarine. That's for the blowout costs for this particular submarine. We've seen the schedule. The last major milestone for that particular project was 17 months late, and that doesn't bode well for a program that's only 4.5 years in the process. So it is a project that is heavily loaded with risk. No one else is taking the sort of approach that Australia is, which you rightly point out is to convert a nuclear-powered submarine back into a conventional submarine. In effect, it is a new design, and new designs attract extreme risk.
So so those are all the questions that we have for Senator Patrick today. I would like to thank you, Senator Patrick, for joining us today and discussing these questions.
It's been a great pleasure, and I wish you luck with your ongoing podcast series.
Thank you again, Senator Patrick, and I thank everyone for watching this, and I hope you guys have a great day.